for the benefit of somebody who may not have a very legal mind. Number one, is it unconstitutional?
Yes, it is. And the constitutionality, of course, is something the High Court would be able to finally look at. But yes, you can ask yourself three things. Was the law passed following the contours that are prescribed by the Constitution?
Yes, because my next question then was, if it is unconstitutional, how did we get there? How was it slipped through the back door?
Yeah, the understanding is that there are two or three things in terms of concepts that we have to accept. One of the things that we have to accept in law is that Parliament would make laws in good faith. And therefore, while it is always easy for us to come back and begin asking, where were we when Parliament was passing this? Why didn't we make our comments? We do that on the assumption that every law they would make, one, they will test its constitutionality. Two, they would be healing an existing and malady that we have identified. And three, that they would all act in the interest of the public as opposed to the whims of one person. So I want to dissuade you from this argument. Where were we when this law was passed?
Yes.
We paid certain people to act on our behalf. We pay legal teams for Parliament. We pay parliamentarians. And we do this, not that we do not have anything else to do, but in a democracy, people would specialize to do certain work. When they fail, we also call upon other agencies that we pay to step in. Because I know where we want to go. There's been this argument, where was civil society? Where was the opposition?
Yes, because the question all the like. If it was passed in a constitutional manner.
And that is a story that we are rewriting. You know, it's like you've cut yourself using a panga, and we are going to ask the guy who works with the grinder, why did you sharpen the panga? You know, it's a weird notion, because all we are saying, Michael did not have any integrity not to cut himself. So the first thing is, we need to ask, is Parliament following the constitutionally laid out processes in passing law? And Parliament here is not opposition, is not ruling party. It is an institution.
Right.
When it fails us, let's not cherry pick and begin to make others messiahs and make others pariahs that they didn't discharge their role. But having said that, I want to come back to the understanding that one reason as to why perhaps we didn't participate as much is that this bill, this act now, was not subjected to public participation. You see that?
Which would be unconstitutional.
Which in itself is unconstitutional. Ab initio. So we don't need to get into the niceties of what is the outcome. If it wasn't subjected to sufficient time for Kenyans to make their input, and that input has been considered, because a previous discussion on SLA, on the Security Laws Amendment Act, began to say public participation is not tokenism. It's not you making an advert on Friday evening, that this law is up there on our website for you to make inputs, and the deadline is 8 o'clock on Monday. So we need to be aware that that did not happen. And it is on that ground that I agree with those who are in court to question its constitutionality.
Okay.
See, Mike, the point that I was trying to make, and he has said that once we pay certain people to do certain things, you know, we should all sit back and expect that they do. But we know that that is not always true. And the Constitution itself has recognized that even the sovereignty that we donate to Parliament, for instance, is not exercised exclusively. We do not cede it whole and we sit back as if we have no role to play. We donate this sovereignty for them to be able to pass certain legislation or to legislate on our behalf, but we retain most of it. And that is why in Article 1, it recognizes that the sovereignty of the people can be exercised either directly by those who have been put in positions and indirectly or directly by ourselves as citizens of this country. The point I was trying to make was that, first of all, I accept that I have failed in that responsibility, not only as a Kenyan, but as a member of the Law Society of Kenya. But coming to the people with the greatest responsibility, because I've been asking myself, we are making all this noise now, but when should a dog bark? You see, a dog that barks after the thieves have left with your, it's a dog that should be put to death. We have an elected representation, as we have a chairman of the Law Society of Kenya, we have a council of the Law Society of Kenya, we as advocates have 2 representatives in the Judicial Service Commission, both of them elected by the members, to do nothing but to look after the interests of the members in those bodies and to be at the forefront of defending the constitution and and laws in this country. So when we hear these noises coming out, and I have seen even members of the Judicial Service Commission complain that, oh, they were never consulted. Now the question becomes, you see, we live in a different time. Proceedings of Parliament are things that are readily available to you, even during during the debate on this amendment. I am sure that if you go to the archives, you will see that this thing was broadcast. All we needed to do is that if, for instance, the Law Society of Kenya is serious in its execution of its mandate, we should have a desk that tracks the movement of bills.
But Edwin, you're in the Law Society of Kenya, so
I started by taking responsibility for failing you. That is what I have done. But I am saying there are people with greater responsibility, those we have put in office to do that, to champion that cause. You know,
for instance, maybe
absolutely, we have to.
The reason as to why I am not going to agree with Sifuna's self-blame approach is that I tracked this law. I wrote to the clerk asking when is it going to be subjected to public participation, and the response was there will be a calendar as we've been doing always. So to that extent, and I take myself to be one patriotic and responsible person.
Yeah, and that is you.
And that they have made that response was sufficient enough to make me wait and say, yes, they've done this on other laws.
It's in the process.
It's in the process. I shouldn't second guess them. They didn't.
You see, for you are in a position where you can say what you're saying.
Yes.
You can imagine we have representatives in the Judicial Service Commission, the very body that has been affected.
But the very
who never knew anything.
The very question we need to ask ourselves for this amendment to have come up, what was the challenge?
What is the thinking behind
What was the challenge that it sought to remedy? And I haven't seen any report from Judicial Service Commission saying when we appointed Willie and his team, these are the difficulties we had. I haven't seen any report from the Office of the President saying in appointing Willie, this is the challenge I had. So that. So I haven't seen any report from the Legal Affairs Committee of the National Assembly saying when we were vetting these people, these are the challenges we had. For that reason alone, I begin to imagine that a few people sat and thought that they need to utilize this for their own personal reasons. If there is, I would like to get that information. And this is what public participation would have helped us to understand. What is the malady the law is seeking to cure? If there is no malady, why are we wasting time? Yet we have other laws that are clearly wanted in the country and we haven't passed them. We've postponed.
Why is this taking place?
Our vigilance is necessary. What I implied was not like we totally sit back, but the law requires that we also allow them sufficient time to discharge their functions, which we have done. When they fail to discharge them or they discharge them wrongly, we retaining that role will be able to point out. And that's why I was reiterating my first point, that when now you come back and say you failed in your role, it doesn't mean you are in the opposition. It doesn't mean you are unpatriotic. It in fact, you are the most patriotic person the country needs, and that's what we
Let me
need to
just
look at.
applaud Henry first of all, because he has what he has
Hit the nail on
done.
the head.
Yes, he has impeached this argument that there was no way that the people we have entrusted with the mandate of looking after our interests could have known about these amendments. If Henry knew about them, and I wish you were our representative in the Judicial Service Commission, or you were the chair of the Law Society of Kenya, you would have made the noise when it was required, not after the thief has left.
Edwin, it sounds like you're putting more blame on the Law Society of Kenya than any other body, because I would also imagine that the Judicial Service Commission, as a body,
Yes.
was also aware that this was happening, and
They
should have raised a red flag.
What is interesting is that the representatives of the society in the Judicial Service Commission have come out to say they never knew. How did Henry come to know about it, and how could they have missed it? Unfair, you know, and we expected that their very first job would have to see this particular danger lacking and to try and arrest it before we get to the point at which we are. That is why I keep asking, when should a dog bark? So that when you make noise now and you miss the opportunity because you were asleep, we can't take you seriously.
So are you saying that the Law Society of Kenya backing now? First of all, the thief has already left the house.
Absolutely.
To use your example, and as a result, is it a fake back? Or
It is a very
like-
fake back, by the way. It is, because you see, a dog has to justify why it's a dog. Once it has failed in its duty, it has to appear to bark. We are not saying that they are not justified. I myself would support wholly the petition that has been filed against these amendments, because I know they are wrong. And I have taken responsibility as a member of the society, as an advocate and as a guardian of the law, that I slept on it, and I'm happy that Henry saw it. And if Henry saw it, our representatives in the Judicial Service Commission should have seen it. Our president should have seen it, but he was there,
Yeah, but let's remind Sifuna that he has a forum to fix LSK. I doubt that that's what you wanted. Otherwise, you would have been unfair.
So we are fixing it.
To the
Don't
other
worry
parties.
about it. We are going to fix
to
it.
the other parties that are not represented here. What we need to ask ourselves, what has ailed this structure? Because remember, the CJ is a member, is in fact the president
Judicial Service
of Judicial Service Commission. He is a lawyer. He swore to protect public interest. He swore to protect the independence of the judiciary. Did we hear him say anything about this? So it is not just Ojienda and Mwangangi. It's for us to ask ourselves, the Attorney General sits in it. What does it mean? So for me, the question is, yes, the dog didn't bark, but it's perhaps barking is to alert the owner that the thieves may have gone with the first cow and they will be back again. So do not take the bark in vain. Wake up and begin to ask yourself, yes, I have a weak dog. It tends to bark after the fact. I may need to bring in one that is ferocious enough. It might not bark, but it will kill somebody. But we need to ask ourselves, our institutions functioning the way they ought to have? Because vigilance is important, and eternal vigilance is what would keep Kenya as a democracy. But our institutions must function. If they are failing us, we must have a process. How do we question the effectiveness of Judicial Service Commission? How do we question the effectiveness of Parliamentary Service Commission?
Okay.
When it is easy to think through other commissions and see that in between their term, we may be able to assess how well they are functioning. The rhetoric of independence of these commissions has been misused to make people just sleep on the job and not do what they must do. And for me, that's the big lesson I've learned out of these processes, that we don't need to sit back and assume that good institutions serviced by bad men and women will give us good results. That good institutions must be serviced by good men and women.
With good intentions.
With good
Mr.
intentions.
Sifuna, now that we're here, and sometimes we can paint a picture like there's no hope, like, it's all lost. How do we fix it? Now that we're already in a place where we realize, and according to the CIC chair, he did mention that we cannot entrust, and evidently looking at the history, it looks like he had a very good point, that we cannot entrust the legislature, the executive or Senate to ensure that the good spirit of the Constitution is kept. How do we fix it?
Well, it is going to be very difficult, given our history, to find men and women who will have fidelity to the law, because that would be the ultimate cure of all the problems that we have. But power by its nature always seeks to expand. And the reason why people do not like the confines of the law is that they would like to extend their influence. I think there is a tire manufacturer who says power is nothing without control, and you see there are people who have actually taken that literally, that you cannot be a president who does not have control over parliament. You cannot be a president who does not have control over the judiciary, for instance. So I do not even believe that we can attempt to fix it by squeezing out the few remaining pockets of wiggle room, so that we leave these people with absolutely no wiggle room, that they have to maintain fidelity to the law, because we cannot leave it to anyone's goodwill. There is absolutely no goodwill within the leadership even of the judiciary, within the leadership of the parliament, and within the leadership of the executive. So that if, in my thinking, because, I do not know where we're going to get these men and women who would, uphold the oath that they have taken to maintain fidelity to the Constitution. So all we have to do, and from where I sit, is to try and squeeze out all those few areas that they have very little room to
elbow room. Mr. Maina, how do we fix this now that we're here? Is this fixable? Is it a matter that we left too much room for them, and as a result we're paying the price?
I think it's for us to be more vigilant. I think we were not as vigilant as we ought to have been. Most of us, our end product was a good constitution being passed. Once we did that, we said hurrah, and went into our relaxing mode. I think it's very clear that we can't do that. I do not entirely agree with the chair of CIC that there can't be anyone, because the way we trusted him to help in this process, there can be other people who can be trusted, and unless he is indicating that he is the only good man born in this country, and that self-gratification would then mean he's the only one we can again give another post if we want the Constitution to be implemented. I think we just need to put more resources and time in the Kenya Law Reform Commission. I understand its weakness being a statutory body, unlike the others which were constitutional commissions that are more protected. But we need to put in more resources. We need to ask more questions of them. What do they do in every year? So that they tend to focus on laws that would help turn around the country, as opposed to laws that would allow certain people holding offices to have more control. We also need to ask more questions of the Attorney General's office. I think in his New Year's interview, he said he has cleared the fixing software part, that we are going to begin seeing the results of his investment. He has the requisite personnel. They've gone for the training they ought to. We don't need this situation where the postponed laws will only, again, the drafts will appear a few days before the deadline. In fact, I would appreciate if the Attorney General's office gave us all the draft bills now, even though we have up to August, so that in the next 7 months we are all arguing and engaging with those drafts, as opposed to unleashing them some few weeks and changing the sitting time in Parliament because we want to beat the deadline. For Parliament, I think the Speaker must raise to a bigger role than what he has been playing. He's supposed to be highly impartial and non-partisan. for the interest of the bigger good, as opposed to the political expediency of the day. Because if we pass the wrong laws, remember we are testing ourselves with a presidential system. We've not had this before. We had a hybrid. If we don't get it wrong right now, we're going to put ourselves in very many problems, because the subsequent 5 years may be wasted not on improving the country, but undoing the bad. So when you find a country that is seeking to amend laws that it enacted in less than 2 or 3 years ago, then it tells you something is wrong. Because that is money, it's time, and the whole country. For me to be thinking about this law is a waste of my time, because I needed to have been looking at another law that is necessary, that hasn't been passed. But I'm now wasting time looking at a bad law passed to please a few people.
Okay.
So vigilance, key institutions must deliver, and we need to find a system of engaging them and holding them to account before bad things happen. I think continuously, not when they want to renew their mandate. That's when we begin to ask, what did they do? Because sometimes it's too late.
Sifuna, let me come to you. And he's talked about key institutions. And one of the institutions that we have as Kenyans entrusted to ensure that especially the Constitution and law is upheld is the LSK, the Law Society
absolutely.
of Kenya. And you've mentioned that by your own admission that there are flaws, and we're expecting, especially this being the year running up to the election year, there's definitely going to be quite a lot of responsibility on the LSK to ensure that things do run the way they're supposed to. How is this going to be fixed?
Well, the LSK is going to be fixed in a few weeks, because we have our election in February on the 25th. We have seen that some of the difficulty that the current leadership has had in checking the excesses of government, for instance, on an area like corruption, is because they themselves have been, embroiled in questions that they couldn't answer, that revolve around integrity, and that emanated from that moribund project they call the International Arbitration Center. And I saw Eric Mutua on one of the local stations making a very unfortunate remark, where he tried to insinuate that there are some candidates that have been planted by the executive, and that it is an extension of this power grab that we have seen, that now that the executive has emasculated parliament, we have seen an attempt to grab some power that they don't have in the Judicial Service Commission, and that now they're coming for the Law Society of Kenya. First of all, we need to understand that there is a concept called the independence of a bar, that the LSK should be independent of all political forces. Right. But the insinuation, by extension, that he made was that he and the current Council of the Law Society of Kenya are the opposition, and that the people that he perceives as candidates of the executive or Jubilee are people who are coming to placate the government, which could not be far from the truth. Eric Mutua, first of all, is the last person to lecture anyone on democratic governance, because he is one of those people. When you see all these wrangles we've had in the LSK can boil down to one issue and one issue only: do members have a right to decide matters on a vote? Which is such a basic democratic tenet, putting something to a vote. All those AGMs that you saw that were acrimonious were because he could not allow a vote to be taken.
Since time is not on our side, and I want us to get to the crux of this, are you saying the cancer that's ailing LSK is simply leadership?
It is the leadership, and I am telling you, you will see a very, very big difference when the elections are done. If the membership will agree that we need a break from Eric Mutua, and that the people who he has propped up that we want to give him a third term, is not going to happen. If we have a proper leadership in the society that respects membership, because you see, charity begins at home. If you have your house in order, it is very easy for you to go out there and say, hey, look at what we are doing, and this is what the law says. We are maintaining fidelity to the law. We are observing constitutionalism and the rule of law within ourselves, that we have a membership that has the power to speak and to decide the matters that affect us. And even when you speak as the chairman of the society, You're speaking on behalf of everyone. People know that you have consulted your fellow advocates, that this is the voice of the Law Society of Kenya, not just your personal opinion. So we have to have a strong Law Society of Kenya, and the strength of the Law Society of Kenya lies in its membership and not in its leadership. So if we have a leadership that wants to ride roughshod of a membership, we are weakening that institution. In fact, this particular leadership has done a lot in weakening the Law Society of Kenya, so that we do not have a single voice when we confront the ills in society. We do not have a single approach or a single voice.
Okay.
We have been fighting ourselves.
Well, we don't have the Law Society of Kenya president here to defend himself, but we'll wait and see for the elections, because last time they were held, it all ended up in...
those were not elections, Mike. I think that is the confusion that occurs. Those were general meetings. Yes. They were general meetings. Now this is an election, and it is an election by secret ballot. We're not going to Mlolongo election.
All right.
So you will not see any problems.
Okay, Henry Maina, your closing comments. Now this is a year where, as I said, we're running up to the elections, and we are bound to see a lot of what would I call it, political upheaval, and especially in regards to the constitution that needs to protect Wanjiku. Your closing comments to Kenyans. What do we need to be vigilant about?
One, we need to be quite clear that the institution of IEBC must be highly protected, but also as it is protected, we must hold it to account on every small bit of what it's taking. Clarity on what is happening about Kenyans who do not have identity cards must be an issue we discuss. So that is a different institution in the executive that has the responsibility of issuing identity cards and replacing those ones that have been lost. We need to ask ourselves how many people have applied for those IDs and how long are they taking? Because we know that by the argument of the functionality of Huduma centers, you should be getting an ID in less than 14 days. But is it true in all areas in the country? The second thing that I would want to think about is we have an office of registrar of political parties where there's been somebody acting for quite inordinate time. I think we need that office bearer either confirmed or a substantive office holder put in, because the era of murky politics has just come in. And if we do not have a person who will understand which are these groups we are registering in the name of political parties, do they meet the thresholds that were put?
Okay.
Without putting us into the jeopardy of having people's names and identities picked from M-Pesa books as it happened last time. Lastly, I think it is time for the elected leaders and those other leaders in different sections to begin asking themselves, when they say we do not want to politicize everything, but in the very process of saying that, they politicize every church meeting they go to, every funeral they go to, every harambe they go to. Are they really helping this country? Okay. I think it is a question that I will continue to ask of all of them.
Edwin, very briefly, your closing comments.
For me, this, like you put it, this period is very, very key, and we are going to observe very keenly the activities of the IEBC, because that body is responsible for what happens to this country from today up to the day of the election, and after that election.
It's the referee.
Yeah. And Mike, we are seeing things that we have never seen in a long time in this country. We are seeing politicians walking out of State House with envelopes. This is something that we thought we had left behind. The first encounter I had with corruption myself in politics was, I think, 1992. I was about 10 years old. And we were actually,
we need to wrap it up.
That's what I'm saying, as in we have taken ourselves back to that position. And the issues that we raise with the IEBC, we have a registration of voters coming up in February, between February and March. We want the IEBC to tell us their preparedness, the distribution of voter registration resources, so that we can see that this is a clear process.
I think by the end of this month, they've actually released a statement that they're going to give us the roadmap to 2017.
But by the end of this month, it will be too late. We will be 14 days to the registration. We need that information.
All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Henry Maina, who is the director for Article 19, regional director for Article 19, and Edwin Sifuna, who is an advocate. Thank you very much for joining us this morning on State of the nation. This is where we're going to wind up Morning Express this morning. Thank you for joining us.